My name is Douglas Harmon, and I'm about to tell you a story that still gives me chills. It all started back in '67, when my wife Eleanor and I decided to take a trip to save our marriage. We weren't getting along so well, you see, thought maybe some time away from it all might help. We packed up our new Winnebago, man, I was proud of that thing, and headed out to this place called Whispering Pines Campground up in Washington State. Sounded peaceful, you know, just what we needed. When we got there, the place was pretty much empty. There was only one other RV around, but we never saw who was in it. Weird, right? Then we met Mr. Patterson, the guy running the place. He seemed nice enough, but something about him just felt off. He told us not to go past these big rocks around the campground at night, said it wasn't safe. We set up our RV and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't quite right. The trees seemed to whisper, and the air felt heavy. Eleanor said I was just being silly, but I could tell she felt it too. Little did we know, our little camping trip was about to turn into the scariest experience of our lives. The first night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was like someone was whispering my name, but it sounded just like Eleanor. Thing is, she was fast asleep right next to me. I tried to shake it off, but it kept happening. The next morning, things got weirder. We opened our fridge to make breakfast, and all our food had gone bad overnight. It was covered in this nasty black mold that looked like little faces. Eleanor said it must have been the heat, but I wasn't so sure. Later that day, Eleanor found an old diary under our RV. It was from some kid back in 1952. We read it together, and it talked about a hungry thing in the trees. I got goosebumps just thinking about it. That night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. The bed was empty next to me. I panicked and ran outside, calling for Eleanor. I found her walking in the forest, eyes wide open but not seeing anything. When I woke her up, she had no idea how she got there. Back in the RV, I noticed dirt under her fingernails. There was also this weird symbol carved into her palm. She didn't remember doing it. We both got scared and decided it was time to leave this creepy place. But when I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. I popped the hood and nearly fell over. All the engine parts were arranged in a circle, like some kind of ritual. That's when I knew we were in real trouble. We were stuck. I tried to use the radio to call for help, but something strange happened. Instead of reaching anyone, we heard our own voices coming through. It was us, talking from earlier that day but saying things we didn't remember. Scary things about hunger and darkness. Eleanor started crying, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, we saw something that still haunts my dreams. We were looking out the window, trying to figure out what to do, when we saw Mr. Patterson walking by. Suddenly, he started to change. His body got all twisted and bony, and these huge antlers grew out of his head. We couldn't believe our eyes. We quickly locked all the doors and windows of the RV. The creature that used to be Mr. Patterson circled around us, calling out in voices that sounded just like our kids back home. But we don't have any kids. At least I didn't think we did. Everything was getting so confusing. Eleanor and I huddled together in the back of the RV, trying to stay quiet. We could hear it scratching at the walls trying to get in. I've never been so scared in my life. We didn't know what to do or what was real anymore. All we knew was that we had to survive the night and find a way out of this nightmare. The next morning, we were exhausted but alive. The creature was gone, but we were still trapped. While Eleanor slept, I started looking through our RV for anything that might help us. In a hidden compartment, I found a stack of old newspapers. What I read made my blood run cold. Every 20 years since 1907, people had gone missing from Whispering Pines. The stories were all the same. Couples came to camp and were never seen again. I felt sick to my stomach. What if we were next? When Eleanor woke up, she was acting strange. She kept talking about memories that weren't hers, memories of hurting people, even eating them. I tried to calm her down, but I was freaking out too. Her teeth looked sharper, and she kept saying how hungry she was. I started to think maybe Mr. Patterson wasn't the only one changing. Maybe that thing, memories people called it a Wendigo in the papers, was trying to take over Eleanor too. The thought made me want to run away, but I couldn't leave her. We checked under the RV and found weird symbols carved there, Just like in that kid's diary, what it was like we were part of some horrible story that kept repeating. I held Eleanor close, trying to figure out what to do next. But deep down, I was terrified of what she might become. Things got worse fast. We decided to check out the other RV in the campground, hoping maybe those people could help us. But when we got there, what we saw made us both sick. Inside were people, or what was left of them. They were barely alive, all chewed up and twisted. Their eyes followed us, but they couldn't speak. It was like the Wendigo was keeping them alive somehow, using them like puppets. We ran back to our RV shaking and crying. Eleanor's hunger was getting out of control. She kept biting her arms, leaving deep marks. I tried to stop her, but she'd get this wild look in her eyes that scared me. It was like she was fighting something inside her. That night, I woke up to Eleanor standing over me, her eyes glowing in the dark. For a second, I thought she was going to attack me. But then she blinked and started crying, saying she didn't know what was happening to her. We knew we had to get out of there. As soon as the sun came up, we packed some supplies and left the RV behind. We started walking, hoping to find a road or someone who could help us. But after hours of walking, we ended up right back at the campground. It was impossible. We'd walked in a straight line. It was like the forest itself was trapping us here. We were tired, scared, and losing hope. Eleanor was getting worse. Her skin was pale, and her eyes looked sunken. She kept mumbling things that didn't make sense, like she was talking to people who weren't there. As we stumbled back into the campground, Eleanor suddenly turned on me. Her face was twisted, and she lunged at me with her now sharp teeth. I barely managed to dodge her. Then just as quickly, she snapped out of it and started crying, saying she didn't remember what happened. I was terrified, but I couldn't leave her. She was my wife, and something evil was trying to take her away from me. We went to check Mr. Patterson's RV, hoping to find some clues. Inside, it was a mess of old papers and weird symbols drawn on the walls. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. Meet us, our wedding photo. But the date on it said 1947, not 1962 when we actually got married. Eleanor saw it too, and started screaming. She said she remembered being here before, many times. But that was impossible, right? We'd never been to Whispering Pines before this trip. As night fell again, we huddled in Mr. Patterson's RV, too scared to go back to our own. Eleanor's voice started changing, sometimes sounding like other people. I held her tight, praying for this nightmare to end. As the night wore on, I found an old journal hidden under Mr. Patterson's bed. My hands shook as I opened it. It was my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing it. The journal talked about coming to Whispering Pines many times before, always forgetting, always getting caught by the Wendigo. I read it out loud to Eleanor, and she started remembering too. We'd been stuck in this loop for years, maybe decades. The Wendigo would feed on us a little, then wipe our memories and let us go, only to lure us back again and again. Eleanor's transformation was getting worse. Her voice kept changing, sometimes sounding like other people, probably past victims. She begged me to help her fight it, to not let her become a monster. I went back to our RV and found that kid's diary again. It talked about a way to weaken the Wendigo, some kind of ritual. I didn't believe in magic, but I was desperate. I gathered the things I needed and started the ritual as the diary described. To my surprise, it seemed to work. Eleanor calmed down a bit, and we could hear the Wendigo howling in pain in the distance. But Eleanor said something that chilled me to the bone. She said the only way to destroy the Wendigo was to kill its main host, Mr. Patterson. I knew what I had to do, but I was scared. Could I really kill someone, even to save us? I grabbed a kitchen knife from our RV and set out to find Mr. Patterson. The campground was dark and misty, and I could hear strange noises all around me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I found Mr. Patterson near the edge of the campground. He looked normal again, but I knew the monster was inside him. When he saw me with the knife, his eyes turned black and his mouth stretched into an impossible grin. We fought. He was stronger than he looked, but I was fighting for Eleanor, for our lives, for our freedom. Somehow, I managed to stab him. As he fell, he started laughing. It wasn't a human laugh. It was cold and cruel. I ran back to Eleanor, thinking it was over. But when I got to her, I knew something was wrong. She was standing there, looking more like herself. But her eyes, they were just like Mr. Patterson's had been. "You did it, Douglas," she said, but her voice wasn't quite right. "You killed the host, but you were too late." I realized with horror what had happened. The Wendigo hadn't just been possessing Mr. Patterson, it had moved to Eleanor too. And now that I'd killed Patterson, she was the main host. I felt like my world was crumbling. After everything we'd been through, after all we'd suffered, it couldn't end like this. But as Eleanor Nedukos, or the thing that used to be Eleanor, stepped towards me, I knew I had one last terrible choice to make. My hands shook as I held the knife. Eleanor Nedukos, or what used to be Eleanor, kept coming closer. Her smile was all wrong, too wide and full of sharp teeth. I backed away, begging her to fight it, to come back to me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of my real wife in her eyes. "Doug," she whispered, "you have to end this, please." Then the monster took over again, lunging at me with a growl. I don't like to remember what happened next. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but when it was over, Eleanor lay still on the ground, and the air felt different, lighter somehow. I cried for a long time, holding her body. The sun started to rise, and for the first time in days, the forest was quiet. No whispers, no strange noises, just the normal sounds of birds waking up. I buried Eleanor near our favorite spot in the campground. Then I packed up our RV, my hands moving on autopilot. I just wanted to get away from this place and never come back. As I drove out of Whispering Pines, I felt relieved, but also empty. I'd lost everything, but at least the nightmare was over, or so I thought. It wasn't until I stopped at a gas station and looked in the mirror that I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My teeth. They looked sharper than before. I tried to tell myself I was just seeing things, that it was all in my head after everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew. The Wendigo wasn't done with me. I drove for days, barely stopping, trying to get as far away from Whispering Pines as I could. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, always just out of sight. My hunger grew stronger each day. Regular food didn't satisfy me anymore. I started having dreams, Meter's terrible dreams, about hunting in the woods, about tearing into warm flesh. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, disgusted with myself. I knew I couldn't go home. I couldn't risk hurting anyone. So I kept driving, sleeping in the RV, avoiding people as much as I could. One day, about a month after leaving Whispering Pines, I saw a sign for a campground. Something pulled me towards it, even though every part of me screamed to keep driving. As I pulled in, I saw a young couple setting up their tent. They looked so happy, so normal. For a moment, I remembered how Eleanor and I used to be. The campground host came to greet me. As I stepped out of the RV, I found myself smiling, my sharp teeth hidden behind my lips. "Welcome," I heard myself say. "I'm Douglas Harmon, the new host here. Let me show you around." And just like that, I knew the cycle was starting all over again. My name is Diana Reynolds, and I'm 17 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but I need to warn others about what happened to my family last summer. It all started when my parents, Jack and Margaret, decided to take us on a stargazing trip to Starlight Basin in the Arizona desert. My twin brother David and I were excited. We'd never been camping before, and the idea of seeing a sky full of stars sounded amazing. We packed up our shiny Airstream Land Yacht RV and hit the road. The drive was long and hot, but as we neared Starlight Basin, the landscape changed. The desert stretched out forever, dotted with cacti and scrubby bushes. It felt like we were the only people for miles. As we approached the entrance to the basin, we saw an old Native American woman standing by the road. She waved us down, and Dad stopped the RV. She introduced herself as Maggie and warned us about those who wear other skins. It was creepy, but we thought she was just trying to scare us. She gave us each a small charm for protection before we drove on. The basin was beautiful, with red rock formations and a wide open sky. We set up camp, and as the sun set, the stars came out. I'd never seen anything like it. It was like someone had spilled glitter across the sky. Little did we know, our magical vacation was about to turn into a nightmare. The next morning, things started to feel off. David and I were exploring near our campsite when we saw something weird. A huge group of rabbits, maybe 100 of them, all hopped in the same direction at the same time. It was like they were following an invisible leader. We laughed it off, but it gave me goosebumps. That night, I woke up itching like crazy. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a strange rash on my arm. It looked like connect the dots, forming shapes like the constellations we'd been studying. I showed Mom, but she said it was probably just an allergic reaction to a plant. Dad was super into his new camera, filming the stars every night, but on the third night, he came back to the RV looking worried. He showed us the footage. The stars were moving in ways they shouldn't. They swirled and danced across the sky, making patterns I'd never seen in any of our astronomy books. We tried to shake off the weird feelings, but it was getting harder. Our dog Rex started acting strange too. He used to love Mom, but now he growled whenever she came near David or me. It was like he didn't recognize her anymore. One evening, as the sun was setting, David and I found some old drawings on a nearby rock. They showed people with animal heads, reaching up to grab stars from the sky. I felt a chill run down my spine as I traced the faded lines with my finger. Something about this place wasn't right, and I was starting to get really scared. Things got even weirder the next day. David went for a hike alone, which wasn't unusual for him, but when he came back, he looked pale and shaky. He told me he'd seen someone who looked exactly like him on the trail. At first, I thought he was joking, but the fear in his eyes was real. He said this other David copied his every move, like a mirror, before disappearing behind a rock. That night, we were all jumpy. Every little sound made us jump. Then around midnight, we heard howling. It wasn't just normal coyote howls. It sounded almost human. Dad went to check it out, and when he came back, he was as white as a sheet. He said he'd seen a pack of coyotes surrounding our RV, but they were walking on their hind legs, and he swore he heard them whispering in English. Mom tried to calm us down, saying it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. But the next morning, we found something that proved it wasn't just in our heads. There were animal skins arranged in a weird pattern on the roof of our RV. They looked fresh, like they'd just been taken off. Dad wanted to leave right away, but when he tried to start the RV, it wouldn't budge. I clutched the charm Maggie had given us, hoping it would keep us safe. But as I held it, I felt something sharp inside. I carefully opened it up and nearly screamed. There were tiny pieces of bone and what looked like human teeth inside. What kind of protection was this supposed to be? The basin that had seemed so beautiful when we arrived now felt like a trap. We were stuck here, and something was watching us. Something that wasn't human. Dad decided to drive to the nearest town for help. He took our old pickup truck, promising to be back in a few hours. But as the sun started to set, he still wasn't back. Mom tried to hide her worry, but I could see it in her eyes. Just before dark, Dad's truck came rumbling back. He looked confused and scared. He said no matter which way he drove, the road always led back to Starlight Basin. It was impossible, but somehow we were trapped here. That night, we all slept in the RV, too scared to be apart. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. It was like whispering, but not quite human. I peeked out the window and my heart nearly stopped. There were figures moving around our campsite. They looked like people, but wrong. Some had animal features, like coyote ears or bird-like eyes. I wanted to scream to wake everyone up, but I was frozen in fear. One of the creatures turned and looked right at me. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and I swear it smiled. Then, as quick as they appeared, they vanished into the shadows. In the morning, we found more animal skins around our campsite, but this time there was something else. A patch of human-looking skin. Mom picked it up, her hands shaking. It looked just like her skin tone. We were all scared and confused. What were these things? What did they want from us? And most importantly, how were we going to escape? We needed answers, so David and I decided to look for Maggie. Maybe she could explain what was happening. We searched the area around the basin, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. While we were out, I noticed my rash had changed. The star patterns were different, moving across my skin like real constellations. It was beautiful but terrifying. David suggested we try to decode the petroglyphs we'd found earlier. Maybe they held some clues. We spent hours studying the ancient drawings. Slowly, a story emerged. The pictures showed creatures that could change their shape, taking the forms of animals and humans. They seemed to feed on the stars, growing stronger during special star alignments. As the sun began to set, we rushed back to camp. Mom was crying when we got there. She showed us her arm. A patch of skin was peeling off, revealing something underneath that didn't look like her skin at all. Dad was trying to comfort her, but he looked just as scared. That night, the stars above Starlight Basin went crazy. They swirled and pulsed, matching the patterns on my skin. We huddled in the RV, too afraid to go outside. Through the windows, we saw dark shapes moving, circling our campsite. They were getting closer. Suddenly, Rex started barking like crazy. We looked out and saw a group of figures around a bonfire, but the fire was wrong. It burned with a black flame, and the figures, they were half human, half animal, dancing in a way that made my skin crawl. We were trapped, surrounded by things we couldn't understand. And I had a terrible feeling that this was only the beginning of our nightmare in Starlight Basin. The next morning, we were desperate to leave. Dad tried to start the RV again, but something weird happened. As the engine sputtered to life, the inside of the RV began to change. The walls seemed to stretch and twist, creating rooms that shouldn't exist. I opened a closet door and found a long hallway that couldn't possibly fit inside our RV. We were all freaking out. In the chaos, we realized David was missing. We searched everywhere, calling his name, but he was gone. Hours passed, and we were sick with worry. Just as the sun was setting, David stumbled back into camp. He looked dazed and couldn't remember where he'd been. But I noticed something odd. There was dirt under his fingernails, and when he spoke, I caught a whiff of something that smelled like raw meat. Dad had been filming everything with his camera, hoping to gather evidence. That night, we watched the footage together. What we saw made my blood run cold. The video showed David being attacked by one of those creatures. We watched in horror as it seemed to absorb him, then take on his appearance. But how could that be? David was right here with us, wasn't he? I looked at my twin brother, really looked at him. Something in his eyes was different, empty. And then I knew, this wasn't David. Not anymore. Mom started crying, and Dad just sat there, stunned. I didn't know what to do. The thing that looked like David just smiled, and in that moment, I'd never been more scared in my life. We were trapped in Starlight Basin with creatures that could steal our faces, and one of them had already taken my brother. As we tried to make sense of what was happening, we heard a knock on the RV door. It was Maggie, the old woman from the entrance. She looked tired and sad. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've been trying to protect travelers for years, but I can't always stop them." She told us the truth about Starlight Basin. Long ago, she'd accidentally summoned these creatures, skinwalkers, she called them. They could change their shape and steal people's identities. Now they were trapped here, and they needed to feed on visitors to survive. As Maggie spoke, I felt a strange connection to David, or whatever was pretending to be him. I realized I could see through its disguise. Maybe it was because we were twins. The creature noticed and hissed at me, its face flickering between David's and something else. Then Mom said something that chilled me to the bone. "I don't think I'm me anymore." She looked at her hands in horror. "I think I was replaced days ago. I'm one of them, but I'm starting to feel human emotions." Dad backed away from Mom, looking betrayed and scared. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Who was real? Who was a skinwalker? Just then we saw a meteor shower start in the sky. Maggie's eyes widened. "The harvest is beginning," she whispered. We don't have much time. We had to find a way to stop the skinwalkers and save ourselves. But how could we fight creatures that could look like anyone, even our own family? Maggie told us we had to act fast. The meteor shower was the skinwalkers' chance to gain more power. She said there was a way to stop them, but it was dangerous. There's a central ritual site, Maggie explained. If we can destroy it, it might weaken them enough for you to escape. Dad volunteered to go with Maggie to find the site. I wanted to go too, but he said it was too risky. He hugged me tight, then looked at Mom, or the thing that used to be Mom, with sad eyes. "Take care of Diana," he said to her. She nodded, tears in her eyes. As Dad and Maggie left, the creature pretending to be David started to change. Its skin rippled and stretched. I grabbed Mom's hand and we ran out of the RV. Outside, the world had gone crazy. The stars were swirling in impossible patterns. Skinwalkers in half-human, half-animal forms were everywhere, reaching up to the sky as if trying to catch the falling meteors. We ran, not sure where we were going. Suddenly, we heard a scream. It sounded like the real Mom. It was coming from underground. We found a hidden entrance to a cave and went inside. The cave was dark and smelled awful. As our eyes adjusted, we saw something horrible. There were people trapped in weird, gooey cocoons on the walls. Some looked half-eaten, and there, in one of the cocoons, was the real Mom. We started to free her, but then we heard something coming. We had to hide. I held my breath, praying we wouldn't be found. The fate of our family, and maybe the world, depended on what happened next. We huddled in the shadows, trying not to make a sound. A group of skinwalkers entered the cave, dragging something behind them. My heart sank when I realized it was Dad. He was hurt but still fighting. "You can't stop us," one of the skinwalkers hissed. "The stars are aligning. We'll be free." Suddenly, there was a loud explosion outside. The skinwalkers screeched and ran out of the cave. Dad had managed to set off some kind of blast at their ritual site. We rushed to free Dad and the real Mom. Dad was weak but alive. He told us Maggie had sacrificed herself to help him plant explosives at the ritual site. The blast had disrupted the skinwalker's power. "We have to leave now," Dad gasped. "The barrier is weakening." As we stumbled out of the cave, the world around us was chaos. Skinwalkers were writhing on the ground, their forms shifting uncontrollably. The sky was a swirling mess of stars and meteors. We ran to our RV, which thankfully looked normal again. Dad got behind the wheel, and we sped towards the basin's entrance. The road that had been looping before now stretched out ahead of us. Behind us, Starlight Basin was collapsing in on itself. Rocks crumbled, and a strange light pulsed from the ground. In the rearview mirror, I saw the skinwalker that looked like David watching us leave. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of my real brother in its eyes. As we crossed the boundary of Starlight Basin, there was a flash of light. Then suddenly, everything was quiet. The stars above looked normal again. We had escaped. But as the adrenaline wore off, I realized our nightmare might not be over yet. Mom was acting strange, moving in ways that weren't quite natural. And my skin, was it starting to peel? We drove for hours, not daring to stop. Nobody spoke much. We were all too scared and confused. Dad kept looking at Mom in the rearview mirror, like he wasn't sure if she was really herself. I couldn't blame him. I wasn't sure either. We finally stopped at a small campground far away from Starlight Basin. Dad said we needed rest, but I could tell he was worried about being in another campsite. We all were. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. I kept thinking about David, trapped back there with those creatures, and Mom. Sometimes when she thought no one was looking, she moved in ways that just weren't right, like her bones were in the wrong places. I got up to use the bathroom, and as I washed my hands, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A small patch of skin on my arm was starting to peel. Underneath, it didn't look like my skin at all. I wanted to scream, to wake everyone up, but I was too scared. What if I was turning into one of them? What if we had brought the horror of Starlight Basin with us? As I stood there, frozen in fear, I saw the stars through the small bathroom window. For a second, they seemed to swirl in a familiar pattern. Then everything was normal again. But I knew the truth. Our escape from Starlight Basin wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of a new nightmare, and I had no idea how to stop it. My name is William Thornton. I'm a history professor, and I've been alone since my wife passed away last year. To keep my mind busy, I decided to chase an old dream of mine, researching Appalachian folklore. That's how I ended up here, in Fog-Bound Hollow, a creepy little valley hidden in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. I drove my old Winnebago into town yesterday. It's a beat-up 1970s model, but it's home for now. The first thing I noticed was the fog. It's everywhere, thick as pea soup. You can barely see 20 feet in front of you. It's like the whole valley is wrapped in a damp, gray blanket. I came here to learn about the walking wolves. It's an old story the locals tell, but nobody seems to want to talk about it. When I mention it, people look away or change the subject real quick. It's weird, but it makes me even more curious. I met a local guide named Emmett Tucker. He said he'd help me with my research, but he seemed nervous about it. His eyes kept darting around like he was afraid someone might hear us talking. Still, he agreed to show me around tomorrow. As night fell, I parked my RV at the local campground. The fog got even thicker, if you can believe it. I can hear strange noises outside, mighty rustling, and sometimes what sounds like footsteps. But when I look out the window, I can't see a thing. Just that endless, swirling mist. I'm excited to start my research, but I can't shake this feeling that something's not quite right here in Fog-Bound Hollow. Maybe it's just my imagination running wild. Or maybe, just maybe, there's more to these walking wolves than I thought. I've been here for a few days now, and strange things keep happening. It's starting to freak me out a little. Last night, I was recording some of the local stories on my tape recorder. When I played it back this morning, I heard growls and what sounded like someone walking on two legs, but I was alone when I made that recording. It doesn't make any sense. Every morning, I wake up to find scratches on the inside of my RV windows. It's like something's trying to get out, not in. But that's impossible, right? I always lock up tight before bed. The locals are acting weird too. I try to ask them about the walking wolves after dinner, but they clam up. They won't look me in the eye, and they hurry home before it gets dark. It's like they're scared of something. Emmett, my guide, is helpful, but he's jumpy. Sometimes when we're out exploring, he'll freeze and stare into the fog like he sees something I can't. When I ask him what's wrong, he just shakes his head and says it's nothing. The fog is getting to me. It never lifts, not even for a minute. It's always there, swirling around, hiding things. Sometimes I think I see shapes in it, like people or animals, but when I look closer, they're gone. I'm starting to wonder if coming here was a mistake, but I can't leave yet. I need to find out what's really going on in Fog-Bound Hollow. I just hope I'm not getting in over my head. Things are getting weirder, and I'm starting to feel scared. This morning I found a page from my wife's diary in my RV, but that's impossible. I left her diary at home. I know I did. The page talked about Fog-Bound Hollow, but my wife never came here. At least I don't think she did. The fog is playing tricks on me. Sometimes I swear I see it forming into shapes that look like people, but when I get closer they just disappear. It's like the mist is alive or something. Emmett is confusing me. Yesterday he told me one thing about the town's history. Today he's saying something completely different. When I remind him what he said before, he looks at me like I'm crazy. It's like he can't remember our earlier conversations. I'm having trouble sleeping. The noises outside my RV are getting louder. Sometimes I think I hear whispering, but I can't make out the words. I'm afraid to look out the window at night now. My research isn't going well. Every time I think I'm getting somewhere, something happens to throw me off. Notes I've written change overnight. Recordings get erased. It's like something doesn't want me to learn the truth. I'm starting to jump at every sound. The fog feels like it's closing in on me. I want to leave, but something keeps telling me I need to stay. I need to figure this out. I just hope I'm not losing my mind in this creepy, foggy valley. Today something happened that I can't explain. I'm shaking as I write this, but talking to an old man about the local stories. Everything was normal at first. Then right in front of my eyes, he changed. His face got longer, his teeth grew sharp and fur sprouted all over his body. In seconds he wasn't a man anymore. He was some kind of wolf creature standing on two legs. I ran as fast as I could back to my RV. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I slammed the door shut and locked it. But when I turned around, my RV was full of thick fog. It was everywhere, even though all the windows were closed. I couldn't see anything. Then I saw them. Red eyes. They were watching me through every window, not just one pair, but many. They were all around me, staring. I'm huddled in my bed now. The fog is still here. The eyes are gone, but I can hear scratching on the walls. Something's out there and it wants in. I don't know what to do. I don't know if what I saw was real. Maybe I'm going crazy. Or maybe, just maybe, the stories about the walking wolves are true. I'm scared to stay, but I'm even more scared to leave. What if they're waiting for me out there in the fog? I've been digging deeper, trying to make sense of what's happening, but the more I find out, the more confused I get. I looked at my research notes this morning, and they're all messed up. There are whole sections I don't remember writing, but they're in my handwriting. It's like someone Myas or something Myas is changing my work while I sleep. Yesterday I found some old silver mining stuff in a shed. But there were weird things mixed in with the tools, like chains and cages, but they weren't shaped right for people. They looked like they were made for something different. I asked Emmett about it, and that's when he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said everyone in the valley is trapped here. They can't leave. He said it has something to do with an accident in the mines back in 1879. Something about them being released. I think he was talking about the dogmen, those wolf creatures I saw. Emmett looked scared when he told me this. He kept looking over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might hear him. I don't know what to believe anymore. Part of me wants to think this is all just a bad dream, but deep down I know it's real. And I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever be able to leave Fog-Bound Hollow. The fog feels thicker than ever now, and sometimes I think I hear howling in the distance. Things are getting worse. I'm starting to see and feel things that can't be real, but they seem so vivid. Last night I had a memory of my wife visiting Fog-Bound Hollow. We were walking through the misty streets together, but that's impossible. She never came here. At least I thought she didn't. Now, I'm not so sure about anything. My RV keeps moving. I'll park it in one spot, but when the fog gets really thick, I'll find it somewhere else later. It's always closer to this old, creepy mine entrance. I don't remember driving it, but it has to be me. Right. Who else could it be? This morning, I checked my camera. There were photos on it that I didn't take. Photos of me sleeping inside my locked RV. Someone, or something me, was in here with me, taking pictures while I slept. The thought makes my skin crawl. I tried to call for help on my phone, but there's no signal. The radio in my RV only plays static. It's like the whole world outside Fog-Bound Hollow has disappeared. Every time I close my eyes, I see those red eyes watching me. I'm afraid to sleep. I'm afraid to stay awake. I don't know what's real anymore. The fog is pressing in. I feel like it's trying to swallow me up. And sometimes I think I hear voices in it calling my name. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to try to escape. I jumped in my RV and started driving, determined to get out of this nightmare. But something weird happened. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back where I started. The roads looped around in impossible ways. It was like the valley didn't want me to leave. At one point, the fog cleared for just a second. What I saw made my heart stop. The whole valley was covered in strange symbols like a giant maze. The roads I'd been driving on were part of it. It looked like some kind of huge, creepy ritual site. Scared and confused, I drove back to town. When I got there, I found Emmett waiting for me. But he looked different. His face was changing, growing fur. He was turning into one of those wolf creatures. I was about to run when he spoke. His voice was rough, but I could still understand him. He said he was fighting against changing completely. He wanted to help me. Emmett told me the dogmen, that's what he called the wolf creatures, were controlling the fog. They were using it to trap people and mess with their minds. I didn't want to believe him, but after everything I'd seen, I knew it had to be true. I was in real danger, and I had no idea how to get out of it. The fog swirled around us, and I swear I could hear growling coming from inside it. Emmett told me something that made my head spin. He said my wife's family was from Fog-Bound Hollow. My wife was born here. I couldn't believe it. How could I not know this? He explained that the dogmen are drawn to people with connections to the valley. That's why they could mess with my memories so easily. It's like they had a special link to me through my wife. Emmett said the dogmen feed on fear and confusion. They keep people trapped here for years, decades even, always scared and never understanding what's really going on. It's how they stay strong. I asked Emmett why he was helping me. He said he was tired of being controlled. He wanted it to end, even if it meant fighting against what he was becoming. Just then, we heard howling. It was close, too close. Emmett's eyes went wide with fear. They know we're talking, he said. We need to move, now. We ran towards the old silver mine. Emmett said that's where it all started, and that's where we might find a way to stop it. As we ran, the fog got thicker. I could hear snarling and heavy footsteps all around us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I knew we were in for the fight of our lives, and I wasn't sure we were going to make it out alive. Emmett and I raced to the old mine, the howls getting louder behind us. We grabbed some of the silver tools I'd found earlier. Emmett said silver might hurt the dogmen. As we got closer to the mine, I saw something that made me freeze. It was my wife standing in the fog, calling my name. But it couldn't be her. She was gone. Don't look, Emmett yelled. It's a trick. I knew he was right, but it was so hard to turn away. Then something strange happened. The image of my wife flickered like a bad TV signal. For a second, I thought I saw her real face, sad but determined. It felt like she was trying to help me. That snapped me out of it. We ran into the mine, the growls of the dogmen right behind us. Inside it was dark and damp. Our flashlights barely cut through the gloom. We could hear the dogmen coming, their claws scraping on the rock. Emmett led me deeper into the mine. He said the alpha dogman, the leader, would be at the heart of it all. If we could stop the alpha, we might be able to break the spell on the valley. As we went deeper, the air got thicker. It was hard to breathe. The walls seemed to pulse, like they were alive. Then we saw at Myset huge cavern, lit by an eerie glow, and in the center, a massive, terrifying shape, the alpha dogman. It turned to look at us, its red eyes glowing with hunger and rage. I gripped my silver weapon tight, knowing this was it. We either stopped this thing, or we'd be trapped in Fog-Bound Hollow forever. The alpha dogman was huge, bigger than a bear. Its teeth gleamed in the dim light. I was so scared I could barely move. Emmett shouted. Now, we charged at the monster, swinging our silver weapons. The alpha roared, a sound that shook the whole cave. It was chaos. We slashed and dodged. The alpha's claws came so close, I felt the wind from them. Emmett was amazing, moving faster than I thought possible, but the alpha was strong. It knocked Emmett down, then came for me. I stumbled back, tripped, and fell. The monster loomed over me, ready to finish me off. That's when I saw her again, my wife. This time I knew it was really her spirit. She pointed to a crack in the cave wall. There was something shiny in it. I rolled, barely avoiding the alpha's claws. I reached into the crack and pulled out an old silver knife. Without thinking, I thrust it up as the alpha lunged at me. The knife sank deep into the monster's chest. It let out a horrible scream. Then it started to shrink, the fur melting away until it was just a man, old and wrinkled. He looked at me with sad eyes and whispered, "Thank you," before crumbling to dust. The cave started shaking. Emmett yelled, "We need to get out, now." We ran, dodging falling rocks. Just as we got outside, there was a huge rumble. The whole mine collapsed behind us. The fog was lifting. For the first time I could see fog-bound hollow clearly. But what I saw made my heart sink. As the fog cleared, I saw something that made my stomach turn. The valley was filled with old cars and RVs, hundreds of them. They were from all different times. Some looked really old, others were newer. They were all arranged in a big, weird pattern. I realized with a chill that each of those vehicles probably belonged to someone like me. Someone who came to Fog-Bound Hollow and never left. Emmett looked at me, his eyes sad. "It's over," he said, "but at what cost?" I felt dizzy and weak. Looking down, I saw blood on my shirt. The alpha must have gotten me during the fight. I hadn't even felt it. "William," Emmett said, his voice shaking, "you're hurt bad." I tried to say I was okay, but no words came out. My legs gave way, and I fell to the ground. Emmett caught me, lowering me gently. As I lay there, I saw the fog start to roll back in, but this time it was different. It was lighter, almost peaceful. I thought I could see faces in it. The people who had been trapped here. I felt my wife's presence again. This time she seemed happy, free. I knew then that we had done it. We had freed everyone. My vision started to go dark. The last thing I saw was a car driving into the valley, a new visitor, coming to research the legends of Fog-Bound Hollow. As my eyes closed, I heard Emmett's voice change. He was greeting the newcomer, introducing himself as William, a local guide. I wanted to warn them, to tell them to leave, but I couldn't. The fog swallowed me up, and everything went quiet. My name is Martin Lawson, and I never thought a simple family road trip would turn into the most terrifying experience of our lives. It all started when our old Airstream trailer decided to give up on us in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. There we were, my wife Judith, and our 9-year-old daughter Emily, my stranded on the side of the road with nothing but desert stretching out as far as the eye could see. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we spotted a sign for a place called Red Creek Crossing. It looked like our lucky break, so we decided to push our trailer there and look for help. But as soon as we rolled into town, something felt off. The place was like a ghost town, frozen in time. All the calendars and newspapers we saw were from 1952, as if everyone had just up and left over 70 years ago. We were about to turn back when we met Harold Davies, the only person living in this creepy town. He seemed nice enough, offering us a spot to camp in his backyard while we figured out how to fix our trailer. Little did we know, accepting his help was the beginning of a nightmare we'd never forget. That first night, as we settled into our temporary home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Emily kept talking about shadows moving outside, but I brushed it off as her imagination running wild. If only I had known then what was really lurking in the darkness of Red Creek Crossing. The next morning, things started getting weird. I always carry my Geiger counter meters. It's part of my geology hobby, and it kept beeping at odd times. The radiation levels would spike for no reason, then go back to normal. It was puzzling, but I tried not to worry Judith and Emily about it. Emily, though, she was acting strange. She started drawing these creepy pictures of tall, skinny figures standing outside our windows at night. When I asked her about them, she just shrugged and said, "That's what I see, Daddy." It sent chills down my spine, but I told myself it was just her imagination. Judith noticed something odd too. She woke me up one night, her voice shaking. "Martin, look at the clock," she whispered. I rubbed my eyes and saw it was 3:33 a.m., but the hands were moving backward. We checked every clock in town the next day. They all did the same thing at exactly 3:33 a.m. It didn't make any sense. We tried to act normal, but we were all on edge. Every little sound made us jump. The wind whistling through the empty streets sounded like whispers. Shadows seemed to move when we weren't looking directly at them. I wanted to leave, to pack up and go, but our trailer was still broken. And part of me was curious. What was going on in this town? What were we dealing with? I had no idea how dangerous that curiosity would turn out to be. As the days went by, things got even stranger. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in the middle of something big, something scary. One day, while exploring the town, I stumbled upon some old military papers. They talked about something called dimensional fracture tests that happened right here in Red Creek. I didn't understand all of it, but it gave me the creeps. Emily started talking about a new friend she called Stretch. At first, we thought it was just an imaginary friend, like kids sometimes have. But then she started saying things about the town's history that she couldn't possibly know. It was like Stretch was telling her secrets. The weirdest thing happened one evening when we were all in the trailer. I noticed our shadows on the wall didn't match up with how we were standing. Judith's shadow moved when she was sitting still, and Emily's looked much taller and thinner than it should. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but when I looked again, the shadows were normal. I tried to keep calm for my family, but inside I was scared. What was happening to us? Was it the town? Were we going crazy? I knew I had to figure it out, but I was afraid of what I might find. That night, I decided to sneak out and take a closer look around town. I didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. That night, I crept out of our trailer, flashlight in hand. The town was eerily quiet, with only the sound of my footsteps breaking the silence. As I turned a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the side of a building, was a figure. But it wasn't normal. It was crawling across the wall like a spider, defying gravity. Its body was long and skinny, just like in Emily's drawings. I stood there, frozen in fear, unable to believe my eyes. Suddenly, the creature turned its head towards me. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and before I could react, a bright flash of light burst from its body. I felt a burning sensation all over, and my vision went white. I stumbled backward, blind and terrified. When I could see again, things looked different. It was like I was seeing two worlds at once. The normal town was still there, but overlaid on top of it was another place, a twisted alien landscape that flickered in and out of view. I ran back to the trailer as fast as I could, my heart pounding. I wanted to tell Judith everything, but how could I explain what I'd seen? Would she even believe me? As I climbed back into bed, I noticed my skin was red and sore, like I'd gotten a bad sunburn. I lay there, wide awake, wondering what that creature was and what it had done to me. One thing was clear, we were in serious danger, and we needed to find a way out of Red Creek Crossing fast. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy and scared. I told Judith what happened, and at first, she didn't believe me. But when she saw the weird burns on my skin, she knew something was really wrong. We decided to dig deeper into the town's history. Judith went to check out Harold's house while I took Emily to explore the old military buildings we'd found. Judith came back looking pale. She'd found photos in Harold's house. Lots of them. The weird part, they showed Harold over the last 100 years, but he looked exactly the same in all of them. It was impossible, but there it was. Meanwhile, Emily and I discovered some underground bunkers. They were full of old computers and strange machines. I found more papers talking about soldiers who could move between different worlds. It sounded crazy, but after what I'd seen, I was starting to believe anything was possible. The scariest part, Emily's drawings of her friend Stretch looked just like some photos we found of the test subjects. When I showed them to her, she just nodded and said, "That's him. That's Stretch." As we walked back to our trailer, I noticed the burn marks on my skin were forming patterns. They looked like the weird symbols I'd seen in the military documents. I tried to hide my fear from Emily, but inside I was terrified. What was happening to us? And how were we going to get out of this nightmare? That night, things got even weirder. We were all sitting in the trailer when Emily said, "Daddy, why is the hallway so long?" I looked up, and my jaw dropped. Our small trailer suddenly had a long corridor that shouldn't have been there. It stretched on, twisting in impossible ways. Judith and I held hands, both of us shaking. We walked down the hallway, but it seemed to go on forever. When we finally turned back, our living area looked normal again, but we knew what we'd seen. The next morning, I noticed something else strange. Our trailer was sinking into the ground. Little by little, it was like it was being pulled into another world. I tried to hide it from Judith and Emily, but they noticed too. We decided it was time to leave, no matter what. We packed up our things and started driving. But after hours of driving, we ended up right back in Red Creek Crossing. We tried again and again, but it was like the town was trapping us. That night, as we sat in our sinking trailer, our old radio crackled to life. We heard our own voices coming through, talking about things that hadn't happened yet. It was like we were hearing ourselves from the future. I looked at Judith, and I could see the fear in her eyes. We were stuck in this town, and something was very, very wrong. We needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. Harold. The next morning, we decided to confront Harold. We found him in his backyard, tending to some plants like nothing was wrong. When we told him about all the weird stuff happening, he just sighed and nodded. "I suppose it's time you knew the truth," he said, his voice sounding tired and old. Harold led us to his basement. It was full of old machines and papers, like a secret lab from a movie. He started explaining, and my head was spinning with each word. He told us he used to be a scientist, working on something called dimensional experiments back in 1952. They were trying to make soldiers who could move between different worlds, but something went wrong. Really wrong. We tore a hole between dimensions, Harold said, his eyes looking sad, and something came through. Something that wasn't supposed to be here. I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought about the creature I saw crawling on the wall, about Emily's drawings, and about our voices on the radio. "What was it?" Judith asked, her voice shaking. Harold looked at us, his face serious. "We called it the crawler. It exists in multiple worlds at once, and it's been collecting people. To stabilize itself in our world." I held Judith's hand tight. We were trapped in a town with a monster from another dimension, and we had no idea how to escape. Just as Harold finished explaining, we heard a loud crash from upstairs. We all ran up to see what happened. The living room was a mess, furniture thrown around like toys, and there, in the middle of it all, was Emily. But something was wrong. Emily's body was stretching and twisting in impossible ways. Her skin was turning gray, and her eyes were glowing just like the creature I saw that night. I realized with horror that the crawler was trying to take over our daughter's body. "No," I shouted, rushing towards Emily. But Harold held me back. "We need to close the tier," he said urgently. "It's the only way to save her and stop the crawler." Judith was crying, reaching out for Emily. "How do we do that?" she asked, her voice breaking. Harold pointed to a big machine in the corner of his basement. "This can close the tier, but it needs a lot of power, and someone needs to operate it from the other side." I looked at Judith, then at Emily. I knew what I had to do. "I'll do it," I said, my heart pounding. We ran back to the basement. Harold started up the machine, while I got ready to jump through the tier. The room filled with a bright light and a deafening noise. I could see another world through the tier. A twisted version of our own. I turned to Judith. "I love you," I said. "Take care of Emily." Then I jumped. As soon as I jumped through the tier, everything went crazy. I was floating in a place that looked like our world, but all wrong. The colors were off, and things moved in ways they shouldn't. I could see Harold's basement, but it was like looking through water. I heard Harold's voice, faint and far away. "Find the control panel. It should look like a big red button." I swam through the air looking for anything that might be a control panel. My body felt weird, like I was here, but also not here. I tried not to think about it. Back in the basement, I could see Judith holding Emily. The crawler was still trying to take over our daughter. Its long, skinny arms were reaching out from Emily's body. Judith was crying, telling Emily to fight it. I finally found the control panel. It was floating in the air, surrounded by a strange glow. I reached for the button, but my hand went right through it. I tried again and again, getting more scared each time. "Martin, hurry," I heard Judith yell. I focused all my energy on my hand, thinking about Emily, about Judith, about how much I loved them. With one last try, I slammed my hand down on the button. There was a flash of light, and I felt a pull like nothing I'd ever felt before. The last thing I saw was Emily's body returning to normal, and Judith hugging her tight. Then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was out. When I opened my eyes, I was floating in a strange, empty space. I could see flashes of different worlds like TV channels changing really fast. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Judith and Emily, but they seemed so far away. Back in Harold's basement, things were getting dangerous. The machine was making loud noises and shooting out sparks. Harold yelled at Judith to take Emily and run. Judith grabbed Emily and raced up the stairs. They ran out of the house just as the ground started shaking. It was like the whole town was falling apart. As they reached the edge of town, Judith looked back. Red Creek Crossing was disappearing, fading away like a bad dream. She held Emily close, crying and laughing at the same time. They were safe, but I was gone. I watched all this happen, feeling both happy and sad. I was stuck between worlds, unable to fully go back home. But Emily was safe, and that's what mattered most. Years passed. I saw Judith and Emily move to a new town, start a new life. Emily grew up, strong and brave. But sometimes when she was alone, I'd see her shadow move on its own. It would stretch and twist, looking a bit like the crawler. I realized then that a part of Red Creek Crossing would always be with us. And maybe, just maybe, a part of me was still with them too. My name is Vincent Garrett, and this happened to me and my family back in the summer of '73. I was fresh out of Vietnam, trying to piece my life back together with my wife Lorraine and our 12-year-old twins Peter and Paul. We thought a road trip through Wyoming's Wind River Range would be just the thing to bring us closer. Little did we know, our little adventure would turn into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It all started when we rolled into Thunderclaw Ravine in our shiny new GMC motorhome. The place was a sight to behold, Midas tall cliffs, a winding river, and trees as far as the eye could see. But something felt off right from the get-go. The campsite was empty, which was weird for such a perfect summer day. You'd think a spot like this would be crawling with vacationers and fishermen. That's when we met Roy Hollister, the local forest ranger. Man, was he a strange fella. He kept going on about those who command the sky and insisted we set up camp in this specific spot. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut and hightailed it out of there. But hindsight's always 20/20ths, isn't it? So there we were, the Garrett family, ready for some quality time in the great outdoors. If only we knew what was waiting for us in Thunderclaw Ravine. If only we'd turned back when we had the chance. The first couple of days were pretty normal. We fished, hiked, and Lorraine took lots of pictures. But then weird stuff started happening. Every day at exactly 3:47 p.m., dark clouds would appear out of nowhere, right over our RV. It was like clockwork, and it didn't make any sense. The weather forecast said clear skies all week. Peter, my boy, he started getting these bad headaches. He kept saying he could hear wings flapping, but none of us heard a thing. I thought maybe it was just the altitude getting to him. One evening, Lorraine was developing her photos in our little makeshift darkroom in the RV. She called me over, her voice shaking. "Vince, look at this," she said, pointing to one of the pictures. There were these dark shapes in the sky that weren't there when she took the shot. We both got goosebumps. I tried to keep calm for the family, but my military instincts were kicking. The twins had been busy too. They found this old journal, all written in Native American symbols. Paul, always the bookworm, figured out some of it. It talked about the Thunderbirds as ancient beings that put their spirit young into people. I didn't want to believe it, but after everything we'd seen, I was starting to think anything was possible. That night, none of us could sleep. The storms were getting worse, and strange things kept happening. Peter started throwing up these small feathery things that moved. When we tried to catch them, they just disappeared. In the morning, we found dead animals around our campsite. arranged in spiral shapes. Their eyes were gone. It was like something out of a horror movie, but this was real, too real. I decided to move the RV, to get us away from whatever was happening, but when I checked our position on the map, my blood ran cold. Somehow, our RV had been moving a little bit each night. Now we were smack in the middle of a huge symbol, something you could only see from way up high. I looked at my family's scared faces and knew we had to get out of Thunderclaw Ravine, fast. We decided to make a run for it. The sky was clear, and I thought this was our chance. I packed up the family and got behind the wheel of our RV. But as soon as we started moving, dark clouds appeared out of nowhere. It was like the sky was angry at us for trying to leave. Suddenly, there was a loud rumble. Rocks started falling down the canyon walls, blocking the road ahead. I tried to turn around, but another landslide cut off our escape route. We were trapped. I tried the radio, hoping to call for help, but all we heard were strange noises, huge wings flapping and what sounded like children crying. It made my skin crawl. "We'll try the engine again," I told my family, trying to sound braver than I felt. But when I turned the key, nothing happened. I popped the hood to check what was wrong. What I saw made no sense. The engine was full of feathers and tiny bones. How was that even possible? We huddled in the RV, feeling scared and alone. The storms outside got worse. Lightning flashed so bright it hurt our eyes. Thunder boomed so loud it shook our teeth. That's when we saw Roy walking towards us through the rain, but he didn't look right. His skin was changing, growing feathers in some places. His eyes were big and round, like a bird's. He came up to our window and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "I've been waiting for you," he said in a voice that didn't sound human anymore. "It's time you learned the truth about Thunderclaw Ravine." Roy's words sent chills down my spine. He told us he'd been a host for 42 years. I didn't want to believe him, but after everything we'd seen, I knew he was telling the truth. "The Thunderbirds," Roy said, his voice getting deeper and more bird-like. "They've been here longer than humans. Every 7 years they need us to help them have babies." Peter suddenly grabbed his head and screamed, "Dad, I can hear them. The Thunderbird. The Thunderbird. They're not just controlling the weather, they're living in the storms." Roy nodded, looking at Peter with those creepy bird eyes. "Smart boy. The lightning, it's like doors for them. Doors between their world and ours." Just then, the biggest storm yet rolled in. The sky turned almost black. Lightning flashed non-stop, and the thunder was so loud it felt like the whole world was shaking. Through the flashes, we saw them. 2 massive birds, bigger than anything I'd ever seen or imagined. They looked ancient and terrifying, with feathers that sparked with electricity. "They're here for their babies," Roy said, pointing at Peter. My heart sank as I realized what he meant. I knew I had to do something. My family was in danger, and it was up to me to protect them. I looked around the RV, my mind racing. There had to be a way to fight these things. That's when I remembered my military training. If these creatures used lightning to move between worlds, maybe we could use that against them. "Lorraine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "get your camera ready. And kids, help me gather all the metal we can find. We're going to build a lightning rod." We worked fast, grabbing pots, pans, and anything metal we could find. I tied them together with wire, making a long chain. The storm was getting worse, and those huge birds were getting closer. "Dad, what are we going to do?" Paul asked, his voice shaking. "We're going to trick the lightning," I said, trying to sound confident. "If these Thunderbirds use it like a door, maybe we can slam that door shut." I climbed on top of the RV, holding our makeshift lightning rod. The wind was so strong I could barely stand. Rain pelted my face, and the air crackled with electricity. Suddenly, one of the giant birds swooped down. It was aiming right for Peter. I yelled for Lorraine to use her camera. She snapped a picture, and the flash lit up everything. For a second, the bird disappeared. Then it came back, looking angry and confused. "Keep taking pictures," I shouted. While Lorraine kept the birds distracted with her camera flashes, I held up our lightning rod. I've never been so scared in my life. not even in Vietnam. But I knew I had to be brave for my family. A massive bolt of lightning struck the rod. The force knocked me down, but I held on tight. I could feel the electricity running through the metal, making it hot. The Thunderbirds screeched. It was the most horrible sound I've ever heard. They started to flicker, like bad TV reception, but it wasn't enough. They were still coming. I realized with a sinking heart that we needed something bigger to stop them, and I knew what I had to do. I looked at my family huddled in the RV. "I love you," I said. Then I jumped off the roof, holding the lightning rod high. I ran towards the biggest Thunderbird, waving the lightning rod like a flag. "Come and get me," I yelled, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The creature turned its massive head towards me, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. I could feel the electricity in the air, making my hair stand on end. Behind me, I heard Lorraine screaming my name. The kids were crying, but I couldn't look back. I had to keep going. Suddenly, the sky lit up brighter than day. A huge bolt of lightning struck the rod in my hands. The pain was unbelievable, like my whole body was on fire. But it worked. The Thunderbird screeched and started to break apart, like it was made of light. Pieces of it flew in all directions, disappearing into thin air. I fell to my knees, barely able to move. Through blurry eyes, I saw the other Thunderbird retreating, flying back into the storm clouds. Lorraine and the kids ran to me. They were all talking at once, crying and hugging me. I wanted to tell them it was okay, that we were safe now, but I couldn't find the words. As the storm started to clear, I saw Roy lying on the ground nearby. He wasn't moving. Whatever had been controlling him was gone now. We quickly packed up the RV, not wanting to stay in Thunderclaw Ravine a minute longer. As we drove away, I kept checking on Peter. He seemed okay, but something in his eyes worried me. Little did I know, our nightmare wasn't over yet. It was just changing shape.